You know, it's not as entertaining seeing five singers in sweaters as it is, you know.
He did not mince words. He did not sweeten the edges. Tom Petty spoke the way he wrote, plain, sharp, and unafraid to sting. In an industry built on compromise, Petty made a career out of defiance.
This is about a journey, you know, it's about a long musical journey.
For decades, Petty fought the record labels, the critics, and the machinery of fame. But beneath the Heartland anthems and the Californian cool was something more personal, a radar for dishonesty. He had no patience for art without spirit, or for artists who traded integrity for attention. From Damn the Torpedoes to Wildflowers, Petty proved that rebellion could be melodic, and that truth could live in 3 chords. But when he spotted music that rang false, he did not hide his disdain.
I like it more when the groups actually play something, you know,
He did not hate lightly. He hated when something sacred was betrayed. Across his life, he named names, sometimes with humor, sometimes with fire, but always with the conviction of a man who believed music should matter. Here are the 6 artists Tom Petty openly despised, what fueled his scorn, and why his honesty made the silence afterward feel louder than applause. Number 1. Garth Brooks. When Tom Petty looked at Garth Brooks, he did not just see a country superstar. He saw the rise of spectacle over song. To Petty, Brooks symbolized the moment Nashville traded grit for glitter, when music became more about stadium smoke machines than storytelling. Petty once said the hat acts of country had hollowed out its soul, and Brooks stood as the biggest of them all. Petty's criticism was not envy. He did not want Brooks's stadium empire or chart-topping records. What struck him was the loss of intimacy, the shift from songs sung in bars to fireworks staged in arenas. He told one interviewer that modern country sounded like a parody of itself, a hollow echo disguised as authenticity. The headset mic, the cowboy hat, the choreographed entrances. Petty saw it as theater, not tradition. And for a songwriter who believed each lyric had to hold truth, the spectacle looked like betrayal. In the 1990s, when Brooks dominated radio and television, Petty voiced his frustration. He told Rolling Stone that Nashville had chased after the lowest common denominator, producing stars cut from the same mold instead of artists willing to risk failure. To Petty, it was proof of the industry tightening its grip, music designed for market research, not memory. One critic echoed the same view. Garth Brooks made country music bigger, but not better. It was the kind of line Petty himself might have written. Brooks's success did not mean survival for the genre. To Petty, it marked surrender. His anger, though, was laced with grief. He had grown up loving country's honesty, its small truths and working-class roots. To watch it turned into a stadium spectacle felt like watching a tradition collapse. For Petty, Brooks was not simply another superstar. He was the moment country stopped telling stories and started selling tickets. Number 2. Britney Spears. Pop did not bother Petty when it was honest, but Britney Spears represented in his eyes the manufactured assembly line of late 1990s stardom. Lip-synced performances, prefab beats, teenage image as product, this was the antithesis of everything Petty fought for. He once called her style cartoon music, a phrase that revealed his frustration with an industry that dressed up emptiness as cultural impact. For Petty, music had always been about connection. He admired pop when it carried weight, songs that could strip down to voice and guitar and still survive. But in Spears, he saw a machine built for image, not expression. The carefully managed public persona, the glossy videos, the marketing blitz, none of it looked like artistry to him.
If you have a choice, you shouldn't go for music.
He told one interviewer that pop acts like Spears were acting out roles rather than living inside their songs. To Petty, that distinction mattered. A singer could perform, but they had to believe in what they were saying. Otherwise, the music became choreography, not testimony. By the early 2000s, Spears dominated the charts, and yet Petty rarely acknowledged her without a note of disdain. In his mind, she was the perfect emblem of an industry obsessed with youth and spectacle. He often argued that when image overshadows craft, the soul of music is lost. One critic echoed this when they wrote, Britney Spears was selling a product, not a song. Petty was not angry at Spears personally. He was angry at what she represented. The endless pipeline of pop stars, polished, rehearsed, and repackaged to fit a moment, was everything he had fought against since the 1970s. In his world, honesty was the only currency. And Britney Spears, no matter how many millions she sold, symbolized to Petty the moment music stopped being truth and turned fully into advertising. Number 3, Kiss. Tom Petty admired showmanship when it served the song. With Kiss, he saw the opposite: makeup, pyrotechnics, merchandise, and a relentless drive to sell an image. He called them a circus, not a band, dismissing their catalog as secondary to the spectacle. To Petty, Kiss were not rebels. They were opportunists who mistook flash for fire. Petty grew up in an era where music was meant to cut close to the bone. Authenticity mattered more than masks, and every chord carried a story. Kiss, by contrast, built their empire on excess. Stadium flames, blood-spitting theatrics, and comic book personas filled the stage. But Petty believed the music got lost underneath. In conversations about rock integrity, Petty did not hold back. He once said that Kiss cared more about t-shirt sales than the next verse, a jab that hit the band's notorious reputation for merchandising. For him, the heart of rock was not about selling lunchboxes or action figures. It was about songs that outlived their moment, music that survived without costumes. Critics often echoed Petty's frustration. One writer noted, "Kiss were masters of branding, but musically they offered little that could not be found elsewhere." That observation paralleled Petty's own sense that the group thrived on volume and makeup rather than melody, creating noise where depth should have been. He did not deny that Kiss knew how to move a crowd, but to Petty, their performances looked more like theater than rebellion, loud distractions in place of substance. He believed true showmanship drew its strength from honesty. With Kiss, he felt, honesty had been buried under the smoke and the glitter. To a generation, Kiss looked like defiance. To Tom Petty, they looked like a franchise. And in his universe, where the song was always sacred, that was unforgivable. For Petty, Kiss were not icons of rebellion. They were proof that sometimes the loudest bands end up saying the very least. Number 4, Nelly. In the early 2000s, hip-hop collided with pop radio in a way that unsettled Petty. He singled out Nelly as a figurehead of what he viewed as disposable rap, songs built on hooks and marketing rather than substance. Petty's critique was not just about genre, it was about erosion of meaning. He felt artists like Nelly were soundtracking the decline of lyrical depth. For Petty, rap was never the problem. He respected hip-hop's origins, the urgency of its stories, the rebellion embedded in rhythm. What disturbed him was the commercialization of that voice, when raw poetry was reshaped into jingles for mass appeal. In Nelly, with hits like Hot in Hair and Ride With Me, Petty saw a blueprint of music engineered for sales rather than survival. He told one journalist that acts like Nelly were proof the industry had stopped listening to the words. For a songwriter who lived by the weight of a lyric, this was the sharpest betrayal. A verse had to carry truth, not just a catchphrase designed to loop on radio. Critics echoed the same concern. One review described Nelly's catalog as hooks first, heart second, songs designed to be commercials for themselves. Petty aligned with that assessment, arguing that when rhythm replaces narrative, music loses its staying power. Yet his disdain was not just generational dismissal. He saw in Nelly a broader shift. The moment corporate America discovered hip-hop could be packaged like soda. To Petty, it was not rebellion anymore. It was branding. That shift, more than any single chart topper, made him bristle. Because in his eyes, music's purpose was to speak truths the market could not swallow. And when truth was replaced with slogans, the art form bled out. For Tom Petty, Nelly was not just another pop star. He was the sound of an industry turning a revolution into background noise. Number 5, Creed. When Petty tore into Creed, he was not just critiquing one band. He was railing against the wave of post-grunge that he believed turned angst into formula. Creed's dramatic vocals and overproduced riffs struck him as hollow imitation. In interviews, he made it clear, bands like Creed were not keeping rock alive. They were embalming it. To Petty, the 1990s explosion of post-grunge felt like a betrayal of what Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden had ignited. The raw urgency of that movement had been reduced to cliches, strained vocals, predictable build-ups, and choruses engineered for radio. Creed, with Scott Stapp's baritone growl and arena-ready production, embodied everything he thought was wrong. Petty once remarked that these bands sounded like they were acting out pain instead of living it. To him, authenticity mattered more than technical polish, and Creed felt like theater, scripted emotion packaged as rebellion. Critics often echoed his view. One review dismissed Creed as a cover band for feelings they never really had. For Petty, who built his reputation on understated honesty, that kind of performance was intolerable. He was not against big songs or soaring choruses. His own catalog was full of them. What he despised was the lack of heart behind the sound. Rock, at its core, was supposed to bruise, to breathe, to reveal something raw. Creed, in his eyes, buried that under layers of studio polish and posturing. Petty often spoke about how dangerous formulas could be for art. Once record companies realized Creed's sound sold, they began churning out copycats, bands that looked and sounded almost identical. That wave of imitation only deepened his frustration, convincing him that the industry was pushing rock into self-parody. In Petty's universe, bands had to mean it. Creed, no matter how many records they sold, felt like proof that meaning had been replaced by mimicry. For Tom Petty, Creed was not the sound of rock's survival. It was the sound of its funeral dressed up as a celebration. Number 6. Modern country radio stars. Tom Petty did not always aim at individuals. Sometimes his fire was for an entire generation. By the 2010s, he blasted the crop of country radio darlings who, in his words, could not write their way out of a paper bag. He accused them of cloning each other's styles, erasing the roots of country, and pandering to corporate formulas. To Petty, they were not artists. They were actors auditioning for playlists. His frustration came from love. Petty had grown up on country music that was personal, lived in, and bare-boned. Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, and Merle Haggard wrote songs that sounded like diaries set to melody. But what he heard on modern country radio was something different. Polished anthems about trucks, tailgates, and beer. Predictable tropes repeated endlessly.
Sometimes the song can come so fast that you're suspicious of where it came from.
He told one interviewer that modern country had all the cliches but none of the pain. For Petty, pain was what made country real. Without it, the songs felt like jingles written to fill airtime. Critics often agreed. One review described the scene as a conveyor belt of interchangeable voices singing the same three stories. Petty shared that sentiment, insisting that true country was not supposed to be wallpaper. It was supposed to cut deep. He was not dismissing all contemporary country. Artists like Chris Stapleton and Sturgill Simpson impressed him, precisely because they sounded rooted in tradition. What angered him was the dominance of what he saw as manufactured stars, promoted for image over substance. For Petty, music was a covenant between the performer and the listener. The moment that covenant was reduced to formulas, something sacred was broken. And that was his greatest disappointment. That country music, once the raw voice of everyday struggle, had been watered down into something glossy and disposable. To Tom Petty, modern country radio was not keeping the genre alive. It was proof that even traditions can be lost when truth is replaced by marketing. Tom Petty never aimed his words to shock. He spoke because silence, to him, was surrender. His dislikes were not petty feuds or passing tastes. They were warnings about what happens when music loses its center. He called out Garth Brooks, Britney Spears, Kiss, Nelly, Creed, and the conveyor belt of modern country radio, not just to tear them down, but to remind us what was at stake. The difference between art and advertising, between truth and theater. What lingers is not the sting of his criticism, it is the integrity behind it. Petty believed songs were sacred. They were supposed to carry honesty, to connect strangers in a single moment of recognition. So when he hated, it was because he loved music too much to see it diluted. That is the legacy worth remembering. What about you? Which artist do you think Petty would have spared or added? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more journeys into music's hidden conflicts and lasting truths.